All right, so we are live on the Dev Talk Show. It is June 13th. I had to check two different. The funny thing is, if I look three different places, I can see the date, but it's early enough that my eyes just wouldn't focus over there, so I had to look over here. You know
Gotcha.
what? For those of you younger developers, you do get older, and these are the
Yes.
things. Yeah, these are the things my parents warned me about, and here we are. June 13th, 2023. I almost said 2013.
Wow. That's going back a ways.
I know, and here we are on the Dev Talk Show. So, how's everything going, Rich? Hopefully, well.
It is. It is. I got a later customer discussion, so we got some time this morning to talk a little bit and just talk about, I guess, what we've been doing. I've actually been exploring a lot of Blazor. I know we've been chatting about it in the Discord, and just trying to get my head wrapped around a few things. And there's some interesting projects and things I want to do with it, that hopefully, once they're finished, we can talk about. But yeah, just having a lot of fun learning about controls, Blazor controls,
Yeah,
and
right.
making sure I get the terminology right after what we were having in the discussion around some of the MVC terms that I forgot what we called them. So
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, Blazor is really interesting. Like my observation was that I mean, it kind of attacks the web space in a couple different ways. I think what always gets the most attention is the WebAssembly part of it, but
Mhm.
it turns out that that's just, I don't know how I want to say it, but that's just like a rendering of pages. It's really not what Blazor is. Blazor is a web framework first and foremost,
Yeah.
and it just turns out that when you decide to render, you can choose to render the old-fashioned way if you want with Blazor Server, or you could render in a Maui app, which is
Right.
actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Or
you can, I mean, I think that's cool from the perspective of you've got the web skills to
yes.
build web pages, and if you extend it a little bit to build those Blazor controls, and now I can just drop it in a Maui app and it runs, which is pretty awesome.
Right, and that pattern we see a lot of I guess what you could call them is like native frameworks have used that pattern for a very, very long time. I mean, we can go all the way back to like, what was it called? PhoneGap, I think,
Oh yeah.
where web technology that ran in the browser. But there's React Native, and then there's Blazor on Maui, and so that's pretty cool. And then yeah, my dog's tripping in too, which is interesting. But yeah, and I think it fills a gap where, in some respects, when you look at what was available in ASP.NET Core, we had MVC, which we've had for a long time. I mean, I was actually trying to look up when ASP.NET MVC came to be, and I want to say that it was around the 2010 timeframe, and then 2011 I think might have been when it was final, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, that model view control pattern was pretty popular in other web frameworks, especially Ruby on Rails. So
Yeah.
what's happened since then is component-based frameworks have become super popular, like Vue and React especially, and I think it's fair to say even Angular,
Mm-hmm.
are about building your page out of components and seeing the page itself as a component, and then maybe the individual parts, and maybe even a part is a components within components. And so that's what Blazor brings you. And it seems to do it in a pretty clean way. We had the ability to share things in MVC, like we had partial views.
Yeah.
And then we had tag helpers.
Yeah.
Which was really like, hey, I want to spit out some HTML, but I don't. But what I wanted in a programmatic way, like I want to be able to have a little bit of server side code render over top of it. And so that was like, well, I'll create something that's a tag. And now, as far as I'm concerned, it just looks like a tag, but it takes parameters and then it does the thing I want.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, in the end, that was what certainly ASP.NET was. It was an HTML renderer. So
Yeah.
you had
Yeah.
components that you wrote in code, and it knew how to generate the HTML because that's what the browser understood.
Right. So I'm interested because it's it's an interesting world that we've landed in where you've got lots of different. We've had this for a while, but you have so many different ways to set out to build a website now, and I'm talking the front end.
Mm-hmm.
That I think you can get paralyzed easily. Is, do I want to stay in my server side language of choice? I think maybe you're a Python developer, so you say, well, let's just Python it all, and we'll use Flask or something, and some kind of templating language. Because really, in the end, you're going to have some kind of templating language that you can maybe fill in gaps in on the server side, and Node has those same things, and here we are in ASP.NET doing the same stuff. But or is it, hey, I'm going to be very client side focused, and we're going to push some code to the browser, and you're basically your machine. This is really what's happening, and I'm not trying to make it sound critical, but here I'm going to push all the code to your machine, and then your computer is going to figure out what to render.
Right.
Like that's what it is.
Yeah, because you're going to run the application to do the things you want to do.
Right. Yeah. So, but what I found interesting is, because this is something that's come up recently for me, and I'm still trying to understand the security posture behind this, because this is pretty complex stuff.
Okay.
Is at least for me, it is there has been a movement from the security professionals to say, the pattern of, here's some static HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just send it down to the browser, and you can have a fully functioning, a SPA, a fully functioning single page app doing authentication, doing login, and it's great. It's super awesome. Host your website in S3 if you want to. And I've always found that kind of interesting. But then we see, let me share my screen real quick. But recently I have been seeing talks like this, and I think this is not new. It's just that I was kind of out of the space for a little while. So, oh, really? Why won't it let me? Okay, I see. Here we go. I was kind of out of this space for a little while. So this is this is Dominic Bear, who, along with Brock Allen, I know them best for creating Identity Server.
Oh yeah,
which I think is often the authentication server of choice for like OpenID and OAuth 2 for .NET developers, especially. It is not a .NET only solution.
Right.
You can use Identity Server because it is an OpenID OAuth 2 server. It doesn't care.
Yeah.
But if you're a .NET developer, it's super easy to get started. It's programmatic. Well, okay, it can be used programmatically such that you file a new project, add Identity Server, and boom, you are running a compliant server. So this whole talk, securing browser-based applications using the BFF pattern, which is also known as the backend for front-end pattern, is the idea that there are enough threats to the web that are very hard to solve. That when you're a front end app, that when you're a browser only app, a SPA, that the contention is that you can't solve them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess if I'm going to put this in a nutshell without trying to take away the fact that the expertise is in this video, it is not what I'm saying. Right. Is that if you go back to strict HTTPS only cookies, you're in a much better place than if you try to hide a JSON token, a JOT token, a JWT. If you try to hide it in local storage, you try to hide it in a service worker, certainly don't render it down to the page,
Right.
But that authentication token is needed by your SPA so that your SPA knows, or it can communicate back to, well, actually, if it's a SPA, then there is no server rendering happening. So how do you build an app that says, Rich, you get to see a menu with these 4 options, and Chris, you only get to see a menu with these 2 options? How do you do that?
Yeah.
And unless
and when I go hit, I forget which one of us has access to the extra option, how does it make sure that I'm accessing it and that I have the rights to?
Right. And so the fear is that if you're not very careful about, frankly, how you hide the token, that anybody can just simply see what you're doing and take it and then say, well, what I want is I want your token is what I want, so I can see all the options.
Yeah.
And all web pages are vulnerable to cross-site scripting. They're all vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. Like, that doesn't change just because you stop building a classic SPA.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that the posture has been, this is so hard that Dominic and even all of Duende and Identity Server folks are recommending, please use this other pattern where really you can use a SPA if you want. You can render the front end, but the authentication handling is done in a very classic way. The way we did back in server-side rendering is, here comes a cookie and it's got the JOT in there. And then the browser is protecting that and sending it with each request. And you don't even know what's in there and you don't care.
Right.
So I think this is a great watch. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but it's been something that I'm kind of focused on. And he goes through the history of it. He goes through how is it challenging to send tokens, and then gets to what I think finally was the coup de grace for all this, which is that if your OpenID server is a third-party server, and you said, well, I'll solve the problem with third-party cookies, those are going away.
Okay.
So browsers are deprecating third-party cookies. That's going to happen in the next year or two. So that channel's gone. And he kind of says, like, so, here's why you can't transmit tokens over URLs. And he talks about why, and he explains very good reasons. Like, if you transmit the token over the URL, it could end up in some server's log file. It could end up in a proxy and in some kind of piece of hardware. And then talks about you can't just store the token in the browser, like he says here. And eventually just says, and then actually demonstrates a few attacks, which is cool.
Yeah.
And then eventually says, okay, here's where you need to give up. I guess YouTube's not keeping up with a lot of because it's probably trying to catch up, but he talks about changes in the browser, whatever. And then eventually says, like, we're going to give up and do this. I don't want to say give up. That's probably not fair. And do stuff like this, the Duende backend for front-end security framework, which I've tried some of these samples out. I don't know that I would call it like a big old framework. I think I don't want to scare anybody off, but they have built some NuGet packages, and then the samples provide you some guidance. And essentially what you're doing is you're spinning up a backend that will, just like a traditional server-side app, that it's the one that's going to send the cookie. It's the one the browser is going to send the cookie back to. But if you want it to be a SPA or a Blazor WASM app, then here come the files. You still code the way that you're used to coding, and you're fine. So it's interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned the Blazor WASM, which is basically bringing all that code down and having it run essentially in the sandbox inside the browser, right?
Yep.
Because that sandbox, does that help with the protection of the secrets, or is that just, hey, we're just basically getting that onto your machine so it can run? It doesn't really help anything from that perspective.
So I don't think this is me, and I'm not 100% sure if I'm right about this. But I'm pretty sure that from a security perspective, there's no real difference. Is what you're getting with Blazor WASM is what you're kind of getting with WASM in most cases, which is, instead of writing JavaScript, let me ship you this WebAssembly that has all the same features of the JavaScript sandbox, except that who knows what language or tool set you built the WASM in.
Okay.
We don't care.
Right.
You just, the fact that you used .NET, or that you used maybe, I know there are some WASM tool sets out there that what they do is they go from whatever environment you're in to WASM, and then that gets sent down. Where Blazor WASM is a little bit of a twist on this. We actually don't do that. What happens instead, well, I say we, the ASP.NET Core team, what happens instead is the WASM that comes down is .NET, that runtime that will run in the sandbox in WebAssembly. And then down comes the same .NET DLLs that you would have written. I mean, they're IL, and then what happens is those are just in time compiled and run locally, and so it's actually quite amazing. But it's not. I'm pretty sure about this. It's not that we basically say, okay, well, while I'm coding here on my desktop, let me turn my C# application into WASM and that gets sent down. No, here comes the .NET runtime in WASM, and here come your DLLs, and then they all run in your browser.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyways, this is just something, and it's not even so much that I'm saying there are other BFF frameworks out there. This is like a whole topic on the web. It turns out, like if we just go to YouTube and we say back end for front end SPA or something, you're going to see, this turns out this one's about Blazor as well, but this next one is not. And you see a lot of it in our community for sure. And actually, let me also say, I think probably you see a lot of it in my search results, because I imagine YouTube is saying, well, here's the kind of stuff you're looking at. So,
right.
But if you keep looking, I have found plenty of other, like, here we go, Python backend, React front end, but except that might not be specifically it. This one might be a little bit more. And it's just interesting to me because in a way, I feel like it's sort of acknowledging that there were some things about server side maybe we were right about all along. Which, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things you had to, there were reasons why everything went to the front end, right? Because it was, certain things work quicker that way, right? You know, when we think about building your app and getting the individual components of an app and just have the data get refreshed from the client without having to involve the server, that also I would think decreases the amount of load on the servers, right? I just got to give you and to the point where you can actually just host it on on some kind of a storage account, with maybe a little bit of web front end, to bring the files down, but that's it. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like one of those things with many of these frameworks. It's a process we have to kind of go through and say, okay, this is kind of where we want to be, but backing it back off of, well, it's not quite everything we need. It serves that need, but it leaves all these other holes that we've now got to figure out how to address. And those are best dressed in what we were doing as opposed to moving things to the client.
Yeah, like, to be clear, none of these authors, none of these videos are saying don't use SPA frameworks or anything like that. They're just saying, right, from a security perspective, this little proxy that does cookie-based authentication at least rises you to the level of the security posture of all the server-side frameworks. So you're not sitting here with a gap that you have to make sure you take care of. And that I think the consensus that they're saying is that, I know you can be really smart and you can say, we're never going to have XSS in our application. We're so good at what we do, but this gap is scary. It's so hard to fill. It's so easy to get wrong. And oh, by the way, what if your library vendor gets it wrong? And you don't know. So
yeah, it's taking on the right amount of risk for your application as opposed to the unnecessary risk.
Yeah. So no, I think that's interesting. And I mean, like you said, there was that whole movement for a while of host your static files in S3 or something, and then heck, if you want to stay 100% serverless, write back to serverless functions, and you can get all the data you need. And that we saw that age of websites, which I think I still see now and then, and sometimes from big, like I'm just saying, this is my personal observation. I don't know what's actually behind the code, but there was a great period of time where when I would go to the Disney websites, where they really felt like this to me, because they would come in and there were so many spinning circles.
Oh yeah.
Because they're like, okay, here's the shell. Now we're calling APIs like mad to get today's park hours and today's this and the ticket prices. And I was just going, this is kind of annoying.
Yeah. And the whole, in Azure having that Azure Static Web App, right? and how it
Yes.
was all connected to functions, connected to where your storage was, and do your CI/CD pipeline right out of GitHub. So making it very easy to leverage that kind of an application architecture.
Right. When you look at the Duende samples, they couch everything in ASP.NET Core backend.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about the backend for front end, I want to make it clear that there are plenty of other folks on the web talking about how you can either use your other favorite platform, or even that this does not end the SPA pattern. You just have to have a proxy somewhere. I can't remember the name of there's a blog, and unfortunately I read it and now I can't remember who it was, which is awful because I'm sure the folks watching this would love to see it. It might be, but it's basically about there was a whole architecture design about how, hey, you can keep your SPA, nobody's saying to take it away, just make sure that you're kind of using cookie based auth instead of the traditional, like, oh, I got a jot and I maybe and I stored it somewhere. But yeah, that's the part where I'm still learning. Like, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to catch up. Security is tough. I've always felt like I've been security minded, but there's a reason why these folks are experts at it, because it's very detail oriented and you have to get it right.
Yeah. And I think I think we're still having, as developers, we're still figuring, having that conversation about moving that left, right? Having the ability to understand, hey, I know how the framework works and I know how to build an awesome application. And security was always that, I'm going to go deploy it. Now I need to think about security as opposed to,
oh gosh, I know.
Yeah, right. What can we do to bring that conversation? And these kind of topics are things that developers don't always have in mind when they're actually starting to architect and start to actually get past the file new project and start writing my code. But
Yep.
we need to, it's
Yep.
it's incumbent on us as developers to understand where we need to protect, write code to protect the application and the user's information that we're passing through it.
Yeah, and again, I think we're, well, when I say we, it could just be me, is I think we're better at not waiting till the end and then sprinkling security on like it's a salt and pepper shaker, because it is built into more new project samples, and that's across the board. I don't care what language or platform you're enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly trying to get your development environment to as closely as possible mirror what at least the user has to see, so that way from step one, even when you're just hitting debug and you're actually going to step through code, still doing that over HTTPS.
Yeah.
Just so there's no difference. Little things like I think little things like being able to run the entire project locally, which is the kind of thing we take for granted. It's super easy at the beginning of a project, but I don't know how many times I've come to a team or to a project, and when I'm trying to get it running and it just doesn't work right. And when I finally sit down, what'll happen is they'll say like, well, this is kind of really, really tough. So instead, like, I write a little code and I send it to this development server, and then I see how it's working, and it's like, well, that's a tough way to live, right?
Yeah.
And then if they really get stuck, they say, but we can remote debug to that if we really get stuck. Well, that's not an easy way to live either. What if it's a team of 5 of us?
Right.
We all can't remote debug.
Yeah.
So making sure you don't lose that stuff is huge.
Yeah. Now, is that because of the size of the application or because of, microservices that sit behind it to get it running appropriately? What's the hindrance in getting that machine up and running quickly?
I think what happens is, and there's lots of different things that can go wrong, but mistakes are made, and maybe like you said, there's a microservice that your app relies on, but that microservice maybe you didn't figure out how to run that thing locally. It's managed by another team. Maybe it requires at least a seeded database of some sort. And so nobody's taken the time to figure out how, at developer time, that's my term for it, can I have that seeded database here on my machine, or if not on my machine, in a reasonably local development environment that it's okay to just blow up whenever I want because I'm a developer, and talk to that thing. So I haven't done that. No one has done that. And so now what happens is you're stuck like, well, if I want to code again, if I want to see stuff in my app, I've got to code against dev, we'll call it the dev environment.
Right.
Well, now there's a lot of problems there. The dev environment's getting upgraded, changed. You even get to the point where people are afraid, like, well, hold on, don't break that microservice in dev because we're coding against it. Well, now dev's not dev anymore.
No.
Yeah.
It's not dev for you as a developer.
Yes.
It's your production, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think those are a mistake that happens. Or maybe this, I've seen this before, is maybe security policies don't allow you to trust a one-off certificate that the dev team may use, you might use just to get this thing running. Like, but then the security team is like, no, there's no way we're going to let you install that self-signed certificate. And you say, okay, well, that's cool, but how do I work?
Right. What's the alternative?
We see it in ASP.NET that this has been built in for a while now, that just with the .NET command line, you can say, okay, add a self-signed certificate. And look, they warn you over and over, please understand what you're doing, which is basically trusting localhost, and understand that if you're not in control of localhost for any reason, that you now trust that code. And that's not just your code.
Yeah.
You know, that's if I do that, which I think almost everyone does nowadays, if I do that and I trust localhost and some piece of malware gets onto my machine that executes a local web server, and then I do something to activate that, that's now trusted. My browser's going to trust that.
Yeah, agreed.
So you got to be careful, but it is important, I think. Yeah, so I've seen situations like that where, so I'll fight like heck to reverse it. You know, I don't know how long ago it was, but recently I came into a project. Well, maybe not that recently. It's probably been a couple of years. I came into a project where that was kind of the posture of the team was, well, we write a little code, then we push it out to dev. And I'm going, wow, you know, this is rough because we also live in a continuous integration world. So when you say you push it out to dev, you're actually committing somewhere instead of maybe the old days where you literally would copy it out there, see how it worked, and then maybe put the old stuff back. I've lived in that world.
Yeah. Yeah, the good old days.
Yeah. So I fought like heck to figure out how to run things locally. And then say, this is how I'm going to do it. And then hope that one other person on the team goes, well, that's cool. And then maybe sort of get everybody to agree. We have solutions now that I'm interested in trying. Some of them are built into like the Visual Studio IDE. Like you can, you know, for example, with your project, you can include a Docker file. So boom, run locally. What if you Docker compose up a seeded database, like ready to go? I don't know if you've tried this.
Not with a database, but certainly with, you know, containers running, you know, back-end services that just, you know, spit data out. They don't necessarily talk to the database. But the idea of I have, you know, an instance of the service that I know I need to talk to for my application running in a separate container on my machine that has my other container, which is my, you know, my front end portion of the app.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things I've seen that I have not gotten to try. One is just the idea of if your app relies on a database, have you thought about, or can you seed a small version of that database for maybe 90, 95, 99% of your dev work? I don't know. And spin that up in Docker as you're firing up the debugger. And the nice thing about that is that if the image has it seeded to a good starting point, then you're always reset.
Yeah.
So I've seen that a couple people promote that kind of idea.
So your data then is almost in memory in the container as opposed to residing on disk somewhere?
Well, I mean, it's probably technically on disk. It's in a Docker image, but
right.
now to your point is I think there's two ways to do it. I think one way is you can have a Docker container that connects to a living volume, and so that volume isn't getting reset every time.
Right.
But I think
Yeah.
you can also have a Docker container that's like, hey, this image, it includes the server, and not just the server, the database file. So it's essentially being reset every time you start the container.
Right, because you drop the
yeah.
container and rebuild it from image.
Yeah, and I've seen some folks promote this for integration testing.
Sure. Because then it's consistent data set that you're doing your testing against. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's consistent. It's even, depending on how beefy your machines are, it's even parallelizable. Because what tests can fire up the images, do its thing, shut down, all that goes away. I don't know how many you're going to run on the same box, but you maybe could run them on a farm of boxes. I don't know. But it certainly is one way to isolate it. And then there's something in the .NET world that I've never looked at called Project Pi. Are you familiar with that?
No, that's a new one.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I feel like the whole point of it, in some respects, was to make this easier. And so let me bring that back up here.
Is it TIE?
TYE, Project Pi. And here it is in the .NET
oh, wow.
organization. I remember seeing, I'm trying to remember who it was that I saw first talking about this stuff. But like they say here, Pi is a tool that makes developing, testing, and deploying microservices and distributed applications easier. Project Pi includes a local orchestrator to make developing microservices easier. And then they talk about deployment a little bit. But when I've seen the Pi demos, what they do is, like it says here, they run many services on one command, and your dependencies are in containers. And so what happens at developer time, there is deployment stuff here. That's this whole second section. But just to stick it to development, the idea here is that your application relies on several dependencies. What if you could fire them all up locally in containers, just for the same reason we were talking about? Fire it up, code, debug, whatever, shut them down. They try to make discovery simpler so that you don't have to wire up as much manually. It's pretty interesting. And I don't know, like they say that it's an experiment. I'm not 100% sure where it is today. I suppose we could do the old trick of like, oh, somebody checked something in 3 weeks ago.
Well, 2 weeks ago, if you look at the top, right?
Oh, was there one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Pull request was merged. So again, there's different samples, some apps built with lots of different things. And the idea here, I think, is that, hey, take a look at how we maybe made our development life a little bit easier by using this. So not something that I've really, really tried, though, frankly.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I know. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's the kind of thing that would be interesting to look at. See, check this out, right? Here's Nick Chapsis. Nick Chapsis always comes up at the top of any YouTube search for me. Hopefully he appreciates the plug to the 3 people that are watching, but but he's one of my favorite .NET YouTubers by far. You can see, look how many things I watch. Bam, 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 bam. And so I try to watch as much as I can. And he has this incredible Keep Coding podcast where, I mean, you just look at who he's interviewed over the last 6 months: Mads Torgensen, David Fowler, Jeff Fritz, Gwyneth Pena. I feel terrible. I'm going to get her name wrong. Pena Seguenza and Stephen Tobin. I don't know if you know Gwyneth.
No.
So here's someone who I'm not going to let it start. Here's someone who I watched. Her Twitter handle is Made by GPS, and she has a YouTube channel also at Made by GPS. I remember seeing her when she was like doing Learn to be a Cloud Engineer videos, and this was purely independent stuff. And then one day she's like, I'm signing on with Microsoft. And I just thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, I feel like I watched the whole rise. She has no idea who I am. I just watched her videos. But I feel like I watched the whole rise from I'm learning, I'm sharing what I'm learning, and then I'm a cloud developer advocate. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
So,
That's a
and
good
yeah,
story.
I watch Nick all the time. So thank you, Nick. But of course, up at the top, number one, his video, how Ty makes building microservices a joke. And he talks about it's what he's going to talk about in the video is making the development easy, but then he even says deploying to Kubernetes was easy. You've got, the on .NET show talking about it. And I think if we go back far enough, these are a lot of things I haven't seen. If we go back far enough, you'll see when this was kind of originated. And so that means, of course, we ran into Xbox. But there's plenty of people talking about it. John Galloway talked about it too. That's cool. I feel like when I first saw it, some of the people I saw associated with it, like I saw David Fowler associated with it because, of course, and there's another name that I'm going to feel terrible that I don't remember his name, but I just don't. So, anyways.
Awesome. So are you using it? Have you used it?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've just watched the videos and said, one of these days, I should try using Project Ty when I have multiple dependencies. But what happens there is that unless I do that on my own, it doesn't materialize in the workplace a lot because I might not own the dependencies.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's true.
And maybe that other, and I'm not trying to, look, some of it is just me being lazy. Well, lazy or just not having enough time. Can I take the other team's work? Maybe I have access to it. Let's say I do have access to it. Could I now take all these repos and build a Ty type solution? I'm not quite sure how you do it. I probably could, but inertia is a real thing in at work, and we've all got stuff to do and features to deliver, and
exactly.
so you don't do it,
Right. I could automate this process, but it's just easier for me to manually do it, and because I got to get it done, right? There's that kind of conversation too, but it would be. We have a couple of demos around here that are microservices based, and they're mainly used for showing off continuous integration, continuous deployment. It might be fun to take that demo. And it's a public demo. I think it's called Traffic Manager, and it has a whole bunch of different microservices. Because what is in the end, what it's doing is it's simulating cars going through an initial checkpoint with cameras to get the license plate and things of that nature, and then at the other end, take images that also capture the license plate, and then do a check of how long it took you to go between the time points, and then be able to that might be Azure Traffic Manager.
That might not be it.
No,
hold on.
Might be in the samples.
This actually might not have anything to do with what you're talking about. This could be an Azure Traffic Manager.
Yes,
which is not the same thing. Yeah, which is not the same thing as your topic.
Yes. I'm just looking real quick, and I don't. Yeah, right now I don't see it popping in the first page or two and stuff. But you get the idea, right? It's all these different services, and you could certainly be able to at least throw those in on top of Project I and see how it runs.
I was hoping to find it. Do you think it's maybe? Well, that's all right. I was hoping to find it. That would have been cool, but that's all right. No big deal.
Yeah. One place I am going to look is, well, no. Yeah, I could probably find it on GitHub kind of quick because that might be where it is. GitHub and then search. A 3D game or a 2D game written in Go? No.
Yeah, as far as one thing that I've been kicking around doing is I just don't know how exciting of a show it is trying to brainstorm topics for talks and so on. For example, there's the easy low-hanging fruit, and this is stuff we're talking about for Philly.net too, is
Mhm.
hey, what should we be talking about in the future? More and more people are coming to the meetup in person. I think the last one was probably the most attendance since we've been back in person.
Yeah.
So it's coming, and we've been talking about even some low hanging fruit, like really getting back into like new features of C#. You can imagine there are a lot of people, me being one of them, who don't stop to think about features that are in C# 11, 10, 9, 8 because they're coming fast and furious now.
Yeah.
And then C# 12 is around the corner. It's going to be here in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
Mhm.
So, probably having some talks or labs about like, hey, here's some new features, try them out, would probably be pretty good. And then, but I also think that helping developers figure out how to set up their projects at work using things like whether it's Thai or whether it's just some of the stuff we talked about, don't paint yourself into this corner where now your only way to work on your code is like some weird process.
Yeah.
So plus I'd love to see what you're doing with Blazor, and I know that's something you're working on. So
Yeah. Hopefully, we are nearing the end of the fiscal year, which means things should slow down a little bit so we can get some time to work on some projects and get some things ready for the new year and all the conversations we have with customers. So, yeah. Plus, I've been. Let's just leave it at that.
yeah, no, well, I mean, look, that's how it is. There's another thing that I'm really hoping to go to is, and I think I will be able to, is if I recall correctly, Tech Bash.
Oh wow!
Tickets are on sale.
Yeah, I'm starting to see announcements for the talks that have been accepted for the day one workshop.
Yep, the speaker announcements are up, and workshops are up. So progressive web app workshop, test-driven development workshop, which is kind of split in half. Yeah. But it's basically, and then design and develop the serverless event-driven, microservice-based solution. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. A lot of good talks in there. Oh, that's cool.
Yep. Azure ML Ops. Is this about using machine learning to monitor production?
Usually it's about your machine learning DevOps pipeline.
Oh, you're right. Okay, I gotcha. Yep. Okay.
So there's many of the machine learning teams are going through the same process that we went through. If you think about maybe 10 years ago, and some of the things you talked about earlier, of I'm just going to take this file and put it on this box here. I'm going to build this thing locally and then just copy and paste it up there. And they're doing all of that with Python notebooks and things of that nature. And that this gives them a way to just like we do on the development side, have a repeatable pipeline to get their machine learning models built, tested, and deployed to production. I am surprised they didn't see anything in the workshop around AI, which is
well,
I mean, just because it's been a lot of conversation across, doesn't matter what platform you're on, there's a lot of conversation around it.
Yep. So yeah,
maybe we'll see it in the talks.
I just thought about it because I actually am wearing a Tech Bash shirt. So
oh, cool.
I didn't even think about that till just now. I said, "Oh, look, I'm wearing a Tech Bash shirt." So
that's awesome.
All right.
Yeah, that's cool. I know. Yeah, we've got some meetings we've got to get to, but it's been a short little session, but a chance for us to kind of catch up on what's going on, which is good.
Yep, and that's definitely what we're trying to do. Is as a lot of folks know, the Wednesday night time slot hasn't worked for the three of us for a while. So trying to either find a new regular time slot and figure out how to connect with all you folks. So, and experimenting with how we're going to stream it. And so this is This isn't the same platform that you've seen before, but I think we can customize it to bring some of those assets back in. So we'll work through that. But in any case, hey, so I know we both got to run.
Yeah.
So let's get out of here, and we don't really have a full schedule for folks next who are wondering, when am I going to see you next? They've been pop-up shows for now, but thank you for joining us. If you're watching us in the future on YouTube, don't forget you can always see any of the replays at youtube.com/The Dev Talk Show, and we'll see you all next time on The Dev Talk Show.